Well, David, you and I both really enjoy reading literature and, in particular, heroic literature. So, we want to take a couple of minutes and talk about what heroic literature is and why it matters, why we should take the time to read heroic literature. So, I think it's appropriate to start out with some examples. Can you give a few examples of heroic literature?
Yeah, so there's been great examples throughout the ages. You think back as far as the ancient Greeks, ancient epics like Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, and think about Beowulf. You think, which I just got done re-listening to because you recommended that I should re-listen to it. It was is a good thing.
Seamus Heaney's translation, I believe.
Yes,
I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, but an Irishman.
yeah,
Yeah, very good translation.
yeah, very good. And I actually listened to it. It was really good to listen to because he had this thick Irish accent. But medieval, you think about medieval works, the romantics like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. You see this young man who was able to pull the sword from the stone because he was worthy. You see him setting up this kingdom based upon these truths of honor and justice. Um, and then you see in the Renaissance, you see the works of Don Quixote, who is who shows us that chivalry is not dead, even when he might seem crazy for being chivalrous. Chivalry is not dead. You see the 20th century classics like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings or Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, which were also inspired by heroic medieval literature that he loved. You see all these great heroes, these great stories of good versus evil. Um, what are some of the ones that you enjoy?
Well, I certainly have to agree. I very much enjoyed Homer's Iliad, which is about the Greek warrior code. That was fascinating to read about that, and the Trojan War, which is the setting. Um, Also, the Odyssey, which is more about the domestic code, as has been pointed out, and his the main hero's efforts to return home from the Trojan War. He faces 12 temptations, and you just see him struggling to return home to his family and his kingdom. So that was very powerful. I really do enjoy stories like the Chronicles of Narnia, and it was meant for younger ages, but there's so much you can learn from the characters. One that I've recently picked up, it's kind of unusual to bring up, but Anne of Green Gables, written
Mhm.
in the early 1900s, follows the life of a young orphan girl who is a lot different than her peers, thinks differently, but is very heroic in her own way. So I think those are some good examples.
Yeah.
Another question, why take the time to read heroic
Yeah.
literature? Uh, you know, I think that a lot of people enjoy reading books on business and economics and
Mhm.
nonfiction books, but why take the time to read fictional heroic literature?
Heroic literature, it often highlights qualities like bravery, self-sacrifice, loyalty, honor. It often explores universal themes like experiencing fear and duty and temptation. Um, and these are things that we can resonate with. Heroes and villains and quests and trials. You see a hero go on this quest and he goes through these trials that strain him and put him to the test, but he's able to come out the other side stronger, having exhibited these great qualities. And they speak to something that's deep within us that resonates with our human condition, a desire that we have. And um, we see good and evil on display in real life in sobering ways that we oftentimes can't feel like we're helpless to do anything about. And so when we read heroic literature, we read this and we enjoy it because we want to see good victorious over evil. We want to see the hope that comes when a hero can stand for what is right and overcome. So I think it's important that we read this because it speaks to what's inside of us, the hope that we desire.
So it sounds like you're saying we need to read it for the virtues that are inside those stories, the examples, but also some of the temptations
Hmm.
we can learn from those situations. And so it does deal with universal human experience
Hmm.
in very profound ways, in ways that I think really fire up the imagination. And so I think those are good points. So help us understand how we should go about reading heroic literature. Do we find the main hero and just try to learn as much as possible from him or her and try to emulate that person in our own lives? Or is there another way to read heroic
Yeah.
literature that's more helpful to us?
Well, I think you definitely, as you read heroic literature, I think our natural tendency is um, to find ourselves in the story, to read ourselves into the story, and that comes from just our natural state of, we're the hero of our own stories. We're going through our own experiences. And so as we read heroic literature, we want to find ourselves there so that we can find hope. We naturally identify with the hero, because we're the hero of our story. We see everything through the perspective of our own experience, but also because we want to believe the best about ourselves, and we want to believe the best for ourselves. But I think a lot of that comes from um, our our inability sometimes, as we are desiring the best for ourselves. It comes also sometimes from our inability to be honest and recognize our weakness. And so I think reading from the hero's perspective is good to see what to achieve or to seek to attain. But I think sometimes a better way is to maybe find ourselves and identify with some of the weaker characters that need the hero. And I think ultimately, um, as we do that, because we have a desire to be good. We have a desire to be virtuous. You think about um, Ulysses in
In the Odyssey.
in the Odyssey.
Yeah,
Sorry,
or Odysseus, but
Odysseus. That's what I
yeah,
meant.
yeah, but Ulysses, and I guess was it Latin? That was the Latin name
Right,
for him. Yeah,
but
which threw me off at first when
yeah,
I read the book. I was like, I read a version where his name was Ulysses, and I was
right,
thinking, well, where's Odysseus? But
yeah.
it's the same character.
But you think about him, and as you were saying, overcoming these 12 temptations, um, to return to his home, to his family. And we read that and we go, I want to be that. I desire that for myself. I want to overcome temptations. I want to fight against all these enemies to be faithful to my wife. I want to fight against all of these temptations in order to return home and be honorable. Um, but a lot of times, as I'm reading these, I'm not honest with myself to go, but I know I'm not strong enough. I'm actually not brave Odysseus strapped to the mast. I'm the sailors who have to plug their ears and have to row with and just be told what to do by, I have to find myself in the weaker characters so I can start from a place of honesty of what I need. And I think that comes from um, my own perspective of reading from a biblical perspective. I think we learn that from the Bible.
Well, us talk about that. What about biblical heroes? There are so many of them. They're so famous.
Mm,
David and Goliath. What can biblical heroes teach us? And I guess what I'm looking for is what are they there for?
yeah.
We believe these were real people,
Mm.
so it's real history. But why are they there, and how can they help us?
Well, I think that the story of the Bible, the narrative that is throughout the Bible from beginning and end, has always been, um, you're not the hero. When you read the Bible, do not presume that you are the hero. It is look at these heroic characters like David or Moses or Esther and recognize that they point their signposts to a true hero, which the Bible is unashamed to say is Jesus. He is the true hero who conquered the bigger enemy of sin and death. Um, and so, what the Bible is always telling us to do as reading from a biblical perspective is to say, to recognize No, you are the weaker characters that need the hero. In
So,
this,
so give us an
so
example.
it,
So David is the big hero in the book of Samuel in the Old Testament.
mhm,
But there are other heroes, or I should say, there are other heroes, but then there are characters that are not so heroic.
right. So in that story, I mean, there is Saul, who is the king, who is cowering in his tent, who is looking for anyone to fight the battle for him. There is the Israelite people, the army, that are waiting to be delivered, and all of them, they
And Eliab,
Eliab,
David's
David's
brother,
brother, right?
right, who was trying to prevent him from fighting
Mhm.
Goliath. He
Yeah,
thought he was crazy.
yeah. So we have all these characters. Um, they're not heroic, but they're there in need of a hero. And what happens after David, the hero, slays the giant? What happens? All of this army, Eliab, the Israelites, Saul, they gain their courage and they chase after the Philistines and they win the victory. They finally charge, but they only do that after David. And so, what do we see from the story? Well, there is a true hero. His name is Jesus. Um, and because of his great victory over sin and death, those who follow after him can have great courage, can stand in truth and loyalty and bravery and honor, but only because this is something that he has done. And so, as we think about this, these they're examples for us of what Jesus has done. Um, we begin our story weak and broken and far from God, but through the heroic work of Jesus, we're able to be transformed to be like the hero. Um, we're not the hero, but we can be like the hero. And I think honestly, that's a stronger way of reading heroic literature. Um, because when we put ourselves directly in the place of hero, there's nowhere to grow. We're denying our own weaknesses. We presume so much about ourselves that it's naive. But when we do set ourselves in the place of recognizing that we need a hero, then there is something to obtain to. There's something uh, to hold up in value and honor.
Well, David, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation about heroic literature and helping us to understand how to read heroic literature in general and the heroes we find in the Bible, and ultimately pointing us to the primary hero, the main one, Jesus Christ. And so, thank you for helping us to understand all these things, and thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, man.